It was during World War II that Petiot's crimes escalated as he operated a fake escape network. So terrible.
For Jews?
He promised safe passage to those that were fleeing the Nazis for a hefty fee. But then instead he would murder his clients, steal their valuables, and dispose of their bodies.
Oh my gosh.
American Timelines is a member of the Queen City Podcast Network. Find out more at queencitypodcastnetwork.com.
So now I'm obsessed with time. Come on, tell me about the time. Had it all in my hand tonight. Had the time of my life. When the words all come down like blues on Tuesdays come down. Throw it all away.
All right, welcome to another episode of American Timelines. I'm Amy, and that's Joe.
And we are happy with the way the world's going.
No, we're not. That's definitely not the case.
No, we're not. You know what? We'll look back on this
Time
in
for
years.
a revolution.
We'll look back and laugh
Oh my God.
on this, hopefully. No, we're back together as a married couple talking about history, and we're talking about 1944,
Yes.
where we left off in March. I'd like to mess with this, but I'm not gonna. We're at March 1944 is where we left off. Thank you guys for being patient. Hopefully you.
For the 4 people that still listen.
Oh, we got more than 4, babe.
Really?
Those numbers are skyrocketing. Again, I don't know who you are, you listeners. Maybe you're just bots.
Bots, probably, yeah.
Or people trying to learn English. I think people just. Honestly, I think people just look for something American. And there's not a lot of history podcasts, and I'm finding out there's not a lot of World War II people talking about that because anybody who's written a book about World War II wants to be on our podcast. So that tells me there's like 3 history podcasts out there because nobody cares about history. But that's not true. Those of you listening do probably care.
Hopefully.
And we're probably a unique voice. There's not many of us that are people that have our perspective probably talking about it the way we talk about it.
Right.
Because usually when somebody, my uncle reminded me, when somebody becomes a World War II buff, they're usually very conservative, older conservatives. So not that we're young, we're not. We're getting older too. But I'm learning about World War II myself. Like, I'm not a buff, but I'm making myself
You're
learn
in the
it.
buff, but you're not a buff.
I am in the
So
buff.
just-
I recorded the buff.
That's right.
And why wouldn't you record in the buff? It just makes for a better sound. Close, hold your lungs down. But anyway, let's jump into March 1944 here. We're slowly getting towards D-Day. We're creeping towards D-Day, which is June of 1944. And I hope you like the authors that I'm sprinkling in. They're contacting me. And, like they say, never say no to somebody who's going to promote your podcast. So
I wouldn't say never.
never.
Like if somebody who wrote like the fucking Turner Diaries wanted to come on the podcast, we'd have to say no.
Well, we have people like Robert B. O'Connor who talked about the Battle of the Bulge and Jeep shows, which I didn't even know existed, and that Mickey Rooney performed for people on the front lines. Like they performed, in the. It wasn't just Bob Hope shows and stuff were all out in safe areas, like
Right.
non-combat areas.
Yeah.
But there were entertainers going into the thick of the battles and doing shows in front of Jeep lights. Like they turned Jeep headlights on.
Oh my God.
And those were the spotlights. And they were
Wow.
just like, so these guys were brave. And that's Mickey Rooney was somebody who did that. Like, so a lot of these guys. And Glenn Miller, we're going to talk about Glenn Miller coming up soon. Do you know that we'll talk about what happened with him. Do you know what happened with Glenn Miller?
No, I don't.
You know who the Glenn Miller Band is?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that'll be a surprise for you when we get to that.
Okay.
So I just recently found this out by doing research. But he was very involved in World War II. Okay. So March 2nd, 1944 was a Thursday. Let's jump in. And the 16th annual, the 16th Academy Awards were held. Only the 16th. So,
It's funny.
you think about where we're at
Yeah.
now, the 9 millionth. They were held at Grauman's Chinese Theater, and Casablanca won Best Picture.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah. This was the first time the ceremony was held in a large public venue. I guess before that,
okay.
they did it in somebody's garage, apparently. Speaking of Bob Hope, he served as the host for the 4th time. Casablanca dominated the evening, winning Best Picture, Best Director, for Michael Curtiz, and Best Adapted Screenplay Humphrey Bogart was nominated for Best Actor for his iconic role.
Didn't we hear a crazy story about Bob Hope? Didn't some
But
taxi driver tell us some crazy story about Bob Hope?
Hold on a second. Humphrey Bogart lost to Paul Lucas for Watch on the Rhine. A taxi driver told us a story about Bob Hope?
Yeah, like he was a taxi driver in New York, and he had to.
This guy
He went around the back, and it was Bob Hope, and he wanted to go out and get a burger or something, and his handlers weren't letting him eat burgers or something, so he helped him get it. I don't remember.
We met a taxi driver?
I think
for
so,
Bob Hope?
when we lived in Chicago.
Oh, you're talking like we heard this story in the 90s?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that was 2000.
Or 2000, early 2000s?
Early 2000s, yeah.
Well,
God knows.
the brain cell that was told that has died in my
That's
head
right.
by alcohol.
Yeah.
So I have no memory of that.
Yeah.
I did know that Bob Hope was a notorious cheater. He cheated on his wife.
Oh, really?
You know, that's what he's mostly known for. I think he's from Cleveland, even though he was born in England, but he was raised in Cleveland. But yeah, he was. Yeah, but I think a lot of people back then. I mean,
Yeah.
it was. The world was like that. I mean, it's so misogynistic and everything.
White men.
Yeah, we really have come a long way with misogyny. I mean, it's still bad. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But basically, it's solved. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. No, it's just we've come a long way.
Yeah.
The film, back to the Oscars. The film, The Song of Bernadette, received the most nominations. Which I've never heard of that. Have you?
No.
It received 12, but only won 4 awards. Maybe that's why we never hear about it, including Best Actress for Jennifer Jones. You know her?
Nope.
The eligibility period for this ceremony was the calendar year of 1943. That's how it works, 1944. And one interesting trivia note, Harold Russell, a non-professional actor who lost both hands in a training accident during World War II, won 2 Oscars for his role in The Best Years of Our Lives.
Oh, my God.
He won Best Supporting Actor and a special award for bringing hope and courage to his fellow veterans.
Aw.
So they had to do things like that during World War II. I mean, it was a world war. It was crazy. Then on March 4th was a Saturday, and Louis Buckhalter died. He was 47 years old. Do you know who Louis Buckhalter was?
No.
He was a Jewish American mobster,
Oh.
and he was executed by electric chair on this day.
Oh, God.
The reason I just kept this in when I found this was just because you don't think about Jewish mobsters really much,
No.
do you? But he was known as Louis Lepke or Lepke Buckhalter, and he was a figure and head of the mafia hit squad Murder Inc. during the 1930s. You've heard of Murder Inc., right? Like Murder Inc. is like a known thing.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I never really knew what it was. It was Murder Inc. It's like a big mafia thing.
Right.
So I kind of looked it up to have something to talk about here on this podcast, and something that's not World War II. And in the early 30s, Buckhalter created Murder Inc., which was an effective process for performing contract killings for Cosa Nostra members, which are mobsters. It had no name, but the press 10 years later called it Murder Inc. So this is what became Murder Inc. And what he did was, these Cosa Nostra mobsters wanted to insulate themselves from any connection to the murders, so they couldn't be traced back to them. So if you just hire somebody, they're going to squeal on you and you can figure out it's them. But so what Buckhalter's partner, mobster Albert Anastasia, would do is relay a contract request from the Cosa Nostra to Buckhalter, and in turn, Buckhalter would assign the job to Jewish and Italian street gang members from Brooklyn who were not related at all or didn't know the people.
Oh, really?
And so none of these contract killers had any connections at all with the major crime families. They were just thugs out on the street. And if they were caught, they could not implicate their Cosa Nostra employers in the crimes because they didn't know who was hiring them. Buckhalter used the same killers for his own murder contracts. The Murder Inc. killers were soon completing jobs all over the country for their mobster bosses. And now you know what Murder Inc. is.
Yep.
And Buckhalter, when he did get in trouble and he got executed using the infamous Old Sparky electric chair after being sent up the river.
Ouch.
To Sing Sing.
Old Sparky.
Yeah, and so I fell down a rabbit hole looking up what Old Sparky was, and that's
Right.
just what they call the old type electric chair, the one we see in like Green Mile and all that.
Yeah.
And in Florida, Old Sparkies were known to have caused flames to actually shoot out of people's heads.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
It's not supposed to be torture.
Yeah, I know, but so it makes you not wonder why the most recent guy in South Carolina chose to be shot by firing squad.
That's probably the
which
most
is awful
that's
too.
probably the
but
most humane.
The problem with that, the firing squad, is though you're trusting these snipers to be able to shoot your heart, because if they miss,
I know you
you're
just get shot all over.
bleeding out. And so I didn't hear how that one in South Carolina went, but I'm like, why are we killing people? Like, I know he murdered his wife's parents with a baseball bat. That's terrible.
Yeah, really.
But what if he didn't? Like, what if slim chance
really.
that it was wrong, that was convicted wrong or whatever? Anyway, March 11th, 1944 was a Saturday. Like, can't we just put all these people on an island somewhere? I don't know. Anyway, March 11th was a Saturday in 1944, and German military officer Eberhard von Breitenbuch took a concealed pistol to a military briefing with Hitler at the Berghof with the intention of assassinating him. He would have been murdered in 1944 in March before D-Day, but SS guards barred Breitenbach from the room where Hitler met with higher-ranking officers, and so the assassination attempt never went forward. There's a lot of these that we find. These people tried to kill him and weren't able to. And that brings us to your story that you've so meticulously researched on March 11th, 1944, which is a Saturday.
Yes.
So what are you going to tell us about? A serial killer?
A serial killer.
Serial killer.
Yes, in Paris.
In World War II. A World War II serial killer.
Yes. Right? His name was Dr. Marcel Petiot, and he was in Paris. Police discovered the remains of at least 10 bodies and a large amount of clothing.
Oh.
The doctor who had killed and robbed dozens of people under the cover of his resistance activity managed to escape. Ooh. So he was this French doctor.
Okay.
His crimes came to light when the remains of 23 victims were found in his Paris home during World War II.
Okay.
He was ultimately convicted of multiple murders, although estimates suggest he may have killed between 60 to 200 people throughout his life, which is kind of high.
That's a lot of people. That's a good big count, right, when it comes to serial killer counts?
Would be one of the tops. His life was marked by a disturbing mix of mental health issues, crime, and deception. Despite exhibiting early signs of mental illness and engaging in delinquent behavior, Petiot managed to serve in World War I, graduate from a medical program, and establish a questionable medical career, which included performing abortions and distributing narcotics. And I don't know why ChatGPT has any against performing abortions, personally. But anyway.
Oh. Well, I don't think it does. This is from Wikipedia. I didn't reword it, but this is from 1944.
True.
So
'cause they were illegal.
I'm sure they were very controversial then.
Yep. His foray into politics was equally tainted, with scandals, theft, and corruption defining his tenure. However, it was during World War II that Petiot's crimes escalated as he operated a fake escape network. So terrible.
For Jews?
He promised safe passage to those that were fleeing the Nazis for a hefty fee. But then instead he would murder his clients, steal their valuables, and dispose of their bodies.
Oh my gosh.
Although suspected of around 60 murders, only 23 victims' remains were found. When he was captured in 1944, he attempted to spin his crimes as heroic acts, claiming he was a resistance fighter who only killed enemies of France. However, his trial revealed the true extent of his depravity, and he was ultimately convicted of 26 counts of murder. His life was cut short by guillotine. Yes. 1946. His heinous crimes have since been immortalized in film and comic books.
Why are you excited about the guillotine?
It just reminds me of the French Revolution.
Oh.
Comic book serving as a haunting reminder of his twisted legacy. Let's see if there's any other that we already know about. So hold on a second here. Is this like another one? His first suspected murder victim was Louise Delaveau, a woman he had an affair with in 1926. She vanished in May of that year, and neighbors reported seeing Petiot loading a trunk into his car. Despite an investigation, the case was dismissed, and Delaveau was presumed to be a runaway.
I guess if you prey on people who are running away from anyway, they're trying to go missing. That's like the easiest people to go after, I guess.
Right.
But how awful could you be?
I know it. That same year, Petiot's political ambitions took off as he campaigned for mayor of Villeneuve. I don't know how to say that. I'm going to try, but I'm not going to do it.
Villeneuve?
Villeneuve-sur-Yonne.
You're not French.
Nope. He didn't shy away from dirty tactics, hiring someone to disrupt a debate with his opponent. He won the election, but soon found himself embroiled in scandal, embezzling town funds.
He ran for office?
Yeah, it looks like
And for mayor?
Yep.
While he was murdering people? After he murdered somebody.
He got married, had a son
Okay.
in 1928. The prefect of Yonne received numerous complaints about his thefts and shady financial dealings, and ultimately led to his suspension as mayor in August of 1931. And then it says he resigned, so I don't know which one, if he got suspended or if he resigned.
Okay.
He maintained a strong support base, and the village council even stepped down in solidarity with him.
So people liked this
They did
guy.
like him.
Huh.
Then 5 weeks later, he was elected as a councillor of Yonne Department. However,
So just some kind of city official, probably.
yeah, his reputation soon caught up with him again. In 1932, he was accused of stealing electricity from the village, resulting in the loss of his council seat. By then, he had already relocated to Paris, where he would continue to build his dubious reputation. So then he was in Paris, and then he started his medical practice at 66 Rue des Camartines, largely due to his use of false credentials.
Oh, my God. So he's not even a real doctor, probably.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So in 1936, he was appointed as a civil registry doctor, which gave him the authority to issue death certificates. And the same year, ironically, he was briefly institutionalized for kleptomania.
Oh, my gosh. The same year he became a doctor, a fake doctor, I guess. I guess in those days, you couldn't, you're at war. There's no internet.
Yeah, people just get away with shit.
There's no TikTok.
Because then he gets released the following year and continues to engage in illicit activities, including tax evasion.
Okay.
Following Germany's defeat of France in 1940, French citizens were forced into labor in Germany. Can you imagine this? So a country defeats you,
Yeah.
and then your citizens are forced into labor, taken back to that country, kidnapped, basically.
Yeah.
Marcel Petiot capitalized on this situation by providing false medical certificates for those drafted, allowing them to avoid labor. He also treated illnesses of workers who had returned from Germany. However, his own illicit activities caught up with him. In 1942, in July, he was convicted of overprescribing narcotics, despite the suspicious disappearance of two key witnesses who would have testified against him. He was just fined 2,400 francs for his offense.
So he probably killed those witnesses, huh?
Yeah. And then he falsely boasted of his involvement in the French resistance during the German occupation. He fabricated claims of inventing undetectable weapons to kill Germans, planting booby traps throughout Paris, and holding secret meetings with Allied leaders. Additionally, he pretended to collaborate with a fictional group of Spanish anti-fascists, further embellishing his non-existent heroic exploits.
Jeez, so he's a liar.
Yeah. There was
He used to
a
booby traps.
connection that emerged in 1980. Former U.S. spy master Colonel John F. Grombach cited Petiot as a World War II intelligence source.
Really?
Grombach, founder of the independent espionage agency The Pond, alleged that Petiot provided crucial information on the Caton Forest Massacre, German missile development, and Abwehr agents operating in the U.S.
Huh.
And those claims weren't corroborated by other intelligence services, but a 2001 discovery of Pond records, including a cable referencing Petiot, lends some credence to that assertion.
So maybe that part's true.
So his most profitable scheme during the German occupation was his fake escape route. Operating under the code name Dr. Eugene, Petiot deceived people wanted by Germany or the Vichy government by promising safe passage to Argentina or South America via Portugal, all for a hefty fee of 25,000 francs per person. He had accomplices Raoul Fourier, Edmond Pintard, and René Gustave Nezonde, who would direct victims to Dr. Eugene, targeting Jews, resistance fighters, and ordinary criminals. Once in his grasp, Petiot would convince them that Argentine officials required inoculations, using this excuse to inject them with cyanide. He'd then steal their valuables and dispose of the bodies. The sinister scheme was incredibly lucrative, with estimates suggesting Petiot netted around 200 million francs from his ill-gotten gains.
Gosh. I mean, he had to share with those other two guys, probably, huh?
So at first he dumped them in the Seine River, but then he later adopted other more destructive methods, using quicklime to dissolve the remains or incinerating them to leave no trace.
Eesh.
So then in 1941, he got a new residence at 21 Rue de la Sueur, conveniently located near the Arc de Triomphe. Interestingly, this purchase coincided with Henri Lafonte's return to Paris, armed with abwehr funding and permission to recruit new members for the French Gestapo.
It's weird when you described him dissolving them. I thought of that scene in
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad when
Yep.
he dissolves the bathtub.
Yep. So then the Gestapo eventually caught wind of the fake escape route, mistakenly believing it to be a resistance operation. Agent Robert Jogcom coerced prisoner Jovan Dreyfus into making contact with the network, but Dreyfus mysteriously disappeared. So then a subsequent informant successfully infiltrated the operation, leading the Gestapo to arrest Petiot's accomplices. And under torture, they revealed that Dr. Eugene was, in fact, Marcel Petiot.
Oh, my gosh. So that the Gestapo actually stopped the murderer.
Yeah.
Just because they thought he was doing good.
He thought he was helping
my
people
gosh.
escape. René Gustave Nezonde was eventually released, but the other three accomplices were not. They spent 8 months in prison, suspected of aiding Jewish escapees.
Hey, we weren't aiding any Jews. We were just murdering everybody.
I know. Despite being subjected to torture, they refused to divulge any information about the resistance, as they were unaware of any involvement. So they didn't have any information.
Yeah.
The Gestapo ultimately released the trio in 1944. Then, on March 11th, 1944, Marcel Petiot's neighbors on Rue Les Sueurs reported a strong, unpleasant odor. This is always how it goes.
Yeah.
And excessive smoke emanating from his residence to the authorities. Concerned about a potential chimney fire, the police called in firefighters who entered the house to investigate. Instead, they discovered a large fire burning in a coal stove in the basement, accompanied by scattered human remains. Further investigation revealed human remains not only in the basement, but also in a quicklime-filled pit in the backyard and inside a canvas bag. The sheer number of body parts discovered within Petiot's home suggest a minimum of 10 victims. Moreover, scattered throughout the property were suitcases, clothing, and personal belongings of his victims, serving as a grim reminder of his heinous crimes. As news of the atrocities spread, a media frenzy ensued, captivating audiences in Switzerland, Belgium, Scandinavia, and beyond. So then, for about 7 months, he goes into hiding, takes refuge with friends, tells them this made-up story that the Gestapo was after him for killing German soldiers and for being an informant. Then he moved in with a patient, grew a beard, and assumed various aliases to conceal his identity.
Okay.
Then, during the 1944 liberation of Paris, he reinvented himself as Henri Valery and joined the French forces of the interior, actively participating in the uprising. He cleverly maneuvered his way into a position of authority, becoming a captain responsible for counter-espionage and interrogating prisoners. Then a breakthrough came when his defense attorney from his 1942 narcotics case received a letter from Petiot denying the allegations published in the newspaper Resistance. This revelation hinted to the police that Petiot was still hiding in Paris, prompting a renewed search effort. And so then, ironically, Henri Valery, Petiot's alias, was among those tasked with finding the fugitive.
He's supposed to help find himself?
On October 31st, his luck ran out.
That's Halloween.
Yep. He was recognized and arrested at a Paris metro station. A search of his belongings yielded a pistol, 31,700 francs, and a staggering 50 sets of identity documents.
Yeesh.
He was imprisoned at La Sainte prison. He maintained his innocence, claiming that the only life he had taken were those of enemies of France. In a bizarre attempt to deflect responsibility, he asserted he had stumbled upon the gruesome pile of bodies in February 1944, but he naively assumed they were collaborators eliminated by his supposed resistance allies.
Ugh.
He had no connections with prominent resistance groups. Some of the groups he mentioned were entirely made up. There was no evidence to support his claims of heroic exploits. His trial began on March 19, 1946. He had 135 criminal charges. He taunted the prosecution during the trial, claiming that many of his victims were collaborators, double agents, or had escaped to South America under new identities. And then, despite the defense's efforts to portray him as a resistance hero, the judge and jurors remained unconvinced, so he was found guilty of 26 counts of murder, sentenced to death. His execution by guillotine took place on May 25th, 1946, after a brief delay due to technical issues with the guillotine's release mechanism. Yikes!
Wow.
He was subsequently buried in the cemetery. And that's the story of Marcel Petiot.
How quickly do you think it's just lights out when you get your head chopped off with a
Oh my
guillotine?
God, I don't know.
Like, is there a couple seconds where you see?
They say that.
You can see while your head's rolling around
Like you see your head, like you can see through your head.
in your brain. Like, how long does it take your brain to die?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Creepy.
Yeah. I don't ever want to have my head chopped off by a guillotine. If anybody ever asks you, if
You're
that's
not
how I wanna
rich
go.
enough, honey.
Yeah, that's true. I'm not important enough.
No.
Well, that brings us to March 23rd, 1944, where I did you the favor of me telling the awful story of the lynching that happened
Yes.
this month. It was George Junius Stinney, Jr., who was born October 21st, 1929. He died on June 16th, 1944. He was an African-American boy who, at the age of 14, was convicted and then executed for the murders of two young white girls, Betty June Binnicker, age 11, and Mary Emma Thames, age 8, in his hometown of Alcolu, South Carolina. And the proceeding was later vacated as an unfair trial after his death, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
But he was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death on a single day in April of 1944. And he was executed by electric chair in June 1944, thus becoming the youngest American with an exact birth date confirmed to be both sentenced to death and executed in the 20th century.
Mm.
A re-examination of his case began in 2004, and several individuals and the Northeastern University School of Law sought a judicial review. And Stinney's murder conviction was vacated in 2014, 70 years after he was executed, with a South Carolina court ruling that he had not received a fair trial and was thus wrongfully executed. So I'll go to the background of this. Alcolu was a small working-class mill town. White and black neighborhoods in the South were often separated by railroad tracks at that time. Schools were segregated, as were churches, and there was very limited interaction between white and black residents. George Stinney was 5'1" and weighed 90 pounds-ish. He and his parents and brother and two sisters lived in a small home with a chicken coop. Stinney's dad worked at the town sawmill, and the family lived in company housing, which I think Elon's trying to bring back.
Yep.
Company housing.
He is.
On March 23rd, 1944, the bodies of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames were found in a ditch on the African-American side of Alcolu after the girls failed to return home that night.
And you know it was some white guy
The
probably
night
went
before,
and dumped him.
according to Spartanburg Herald Journal. Yeah, that's where you would.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you would do. You'd just blame it on the people everybody hates in town if you're a racist, awful white murderer. Anyway, the girls had been beaten with a weapon, variously reported as a piece of blunt metal or a railroad spike. Binnicker and Thames both suffered severe blunt force trauma to their skulls. According to a report by the medical examiner, these wounds had been inflicted by a blunt instrument with a round head about the size of a hammer. They reported no evidence of sexual assault to the younger girl, though the genitalia of the older girl were slightly bruised. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles looking for flowers as they passed the Stinney's house. They had asked Stinney and his sister Amy if they knew where to find maypops. That's what they called passion flowers, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
According to Amy, she was with Stinney at the time the police claimed the murders occurred, so he couldn't have done it. But that's his sister, and they're not going to listen to her. According to an article reported by the Wire Service on March 24th, 1944, the sheriff announced the arrest of George Junius and stated that the boy had confessed and led officers to a hidden piece of iron. That's according to the Milwaukee Journal and the St. Petersburg Times. So he was investigated without lawyers, without parents or anything.
Yeah.
And they claimed he admitted it. Investigation, as far as the investigation goes, George and his older brother John were arrested on suspicion of murdering the girls. John was released, but George was held in custody and not allowed to see his parents until after the trial and conviction. Can you imagine that?
Oh, my God.
According to a handwritten statement, the arresting officer was H.S. Newman, a Clarendon County deputy who stated, quote, "I arrested the boy by name of George Stinney. He then made a confession and told me where to find a piece of iron about 15 inches, where he said he put it in a ditch about 6 feet from the bicycle, unquote. However, back in 1995, W.L. Hamilton, George's 7th grade teacher who was black, told the Item newspaper that George had a temper and that he got into a fight with a girl at school, scratching her with a knife. Amy, his sister, phoned Hamilton after she read that story, and she says, "That bastard, that was a damn lie. When I heard about that lie, Mr. Hamilton told, I called him up, and I said, my name is Amy Stinney, and you said my brother was a bad boy. You got one foot on a banana peel and the other going straight to hell." And Amy said, I asked him why he would say something like that, she said, and then she later said, he told me somebody paid him to say it.
Yeah, probably.
I don't know who paid him, but his exact words were, because they paid me. Hamilton, the teacher, died shortly after his interview was published. Anyway, from the moment he was picked up until after his trial on April 24th, the child was not allowed to see his parents. He was alone throughout and faced a jury of 12 white men who took less than 10 minutes to deliberate as a mob of up to 1,500 people surrounded the courtroom, according to reports.
Oh, my God.
Amy's parents were allowed to visit their son only once.
So unjust.
At
So
Columbia
unjust.
Penitentiary after the trial. They returned, convinced of his innocence, but as poor blacks in the South with little recourse, there's nothing they could do. Amy said, my mother cried and prayed. We wanted the truth to come out, but sometimes when you don't have the means and the money, you accept things for what they are. The NAACP tried to stop it, but it was no use. In those days, when you were white, you were right, and when you were black, you were wrong. Following Stinney's arrest, his father was fired from his job at the local sawmill, and the Stinney family had to immediately vacate their company housing, and the family feared for their safety. The entire proceeding of the trial against George Stinney, including jury selection, took place on April 24th, 1944. The whole thing, one day. Stinney's court-appointed counsel was Charles Plowden, a tax commissioner campaigning for election to local office. So you know he's going to just try to please the white people. Plowden did not challenge the 3 police officers who testified that Stinney confessed to the 2 murders, nor did he try to defend Stinney. He also did not challenge the prosecution's presentation of 2 different versions of Stinney's verbal confession. In one version, Stinney was attacked by the girls after he tried to help one girl who had fallen in the ditch, and then he killed him in self-defense. In the other version, he followed the girls, first attacking Mary Emma, then Betty June. There's no written record of Stinney's confession apart from Deputy Newman's statement. Other than the testimony of the 3 police officers at trial, prosecutors called 3 witnesses: Reverend Francis Batson, who discovered the bodies of the girls, and 2 doctors who performed the postmortem examination. The court allowed discussion of the possibility of rape due to the bruising on Benneker's genitalia, and Stinney's counsel did not call any witnesses, did not cross-examine witnesses, and offered little or no defense. The trial presentation lasted 2.5 hours. More than 1,000 white people crowded the courtroom, but no black Americans were allowed in, as was typical of the time. Stinney was tried before an all-white jury. After deliberating for less than 10 minutes, the jury found Stinney guilty of murder. Judge Philip H. Stoll sentenced Stinney to death by electrocution. There's no transcript of the trial, and no appeal was filed by Stinney's counsel. Stinney's family, churches, of the NAACP appealed to Governor Olin D. Johnson for clemency, given the age of the boy. Most of the pleas for clemency came from white women living in South Carolina. Some pleas from whites came with affirmations of white supremacy.
Of course.
But discomfort at the prospect of someone so young being executed is all they were concerned about. Others urged the governor to let the execution proceed, which he did. He visited George Stinney in the death house 2 days before his execution on June 14th. Johnson wrote a response to one appeal for clemency stating, I've just talked with the officer who made the arrest in this case. It may be interesting for you to know that Stinney killed the smaller girl to rape the larger one. Then he killed the larger girl and raped her dead body. 20 minutes later, he returned and attempted to rape her again, but her body was too cold. All of this he admitted himself. It was reported that these were merely rumors, and Johnson's claims were not corroborated by the girls' autopsies. An execution of a child as young as 14, virtually unheard of in U.S. history, even for black children in the Jim Crow South who were convicted of murdering or raping white victims. Many sources say that Stinney was the youngest person executed in the U.S. in the 20th century. He was executed on Friday, June 16th, 1944 at 7:30 a.m. He was prepared for execution by electric chair using a Bible as a booster seat because he was too small for the chair, allegedly. He was then restrained by his arms, legs, and body to the chair. An officer asked George if he had any last words to say before the execution took place, but he only shook his head and said, "No, sir." The executioner pulled a strap from the chair and placed it over George's mouth, causing him to break into tears. And he then placed the face mask over his face, which did not fit him, as he continued sobbing. When the lethal electricity was applied, the mask covering slipped off, revealing tears streaming down his face. This is a child. This perception was later contested by Terry Evans, the niece of Mary Emma Thames' mother, Lula May, who witnessed the execution. Barnes told Evans' father that what he saw during the execution, which was then relayed to her years later. Her father stated that Barnes said it was just a rumor that the hood had slipped, and they didn't put a stack of books on her, but that's all hearsay also. Stinney was buried in an unmarked grave at the Calvary Baptist Church Cemetery in Lee County, South Carolina. And later, when the case was reopened and the conviction was vacated, the catalyst for that legal action came via George Frierson, a local historian and a member of Clarendon School District, Clarendon's School District 3's Board of Trustees, who was born in Alcaloo and went to elementary school when the lumberyard was still running. Frierson began investigating the case in 2004 after a small piece in a local newspaper reminded him of it. Frierson said the more he researched, the more he became convinced of George's innocence. He says there was little blood at the ditch, evidence that the girls were killed elsewhere, probably on the white side of town. A 95-pound boy can't carry two dead bodies a quarter mile or more.
Right.
Those girls were beaten to a pulp. There had been a lot of blood. His work caught the interest of Steve McKenzie and Matt Burgess, who were white attorneys from Coffey, Chandler, and McKenzie, who took on the case for the Stinney family. McKenzie filed papers at the county solicitor in October 2013 to ask to have George's verdict overturned. He, Burgess, and Miller Sheely, a professor of criminal procedure at the Charleston School of Law, presented new evidence, which included sworn statements by Charles and Amy that they were with George the day the girls went missing, as she tried to say before. Wilford Johnny Hunter, who was in prison with George, also testified that the teenager told him he had been made to confess. Among those who aided the case were the Civil Rights and Restorative Judge Project at the Northeastern University School of Law, which filed an amicus brief with the court in 2014. Frierson and the pro bono lawyers first sought relief through the Pardon and Parole Board of South Carolina. Frierson stated in interviews, "There's been a person that has been named as being the culprit who is now deceased, and it was said by the family that there was a deathbed confession."
Oh.
Frierson said that the rumored culprit came from a well-known, prominent white family. A member or members of that family had served on the initial coroner's inquest jury, which had recommended that Stinney be prosecuted.
Of course.
In the amicus brief, the CRRJ said there's compelling evidence that George Stinney was innocent of the crimes which he was executed in 1944. The prosecutor relied almost exclusively on one piece of evidence to obtain a conviction in the capital case, the unrecorded, unsigned confession of a 14-year-old who was deprived of counsel and parental guidance, and whose defense lawyer shockingly failed to call exculpating
Exculpatory?
exculpating witnesses.
Oh.
I don't know, exculpatory witnesses, I guess you could say, or to preserve his right of appeal. New evidence in the court hearings in January 2014 include testimony by Stinney's siblings that he was with them at the time of the murders. In addition, an affidavit was introduced from the Reverend Francis Batson, who found the girls from the water-filled ditch and pulled them out. In a statement, he recalled there was not much blood in or around the ditch, suggesting they may have been killed elsewhere and moved. So they ruled that he didn't receive a fair trial.
A little late.
Yeah, a little late. And the alternate suspect was George Washington Burke, Jr., the son of a wealthy white businessman, George Burke, Sr.
Mm-hmm.
That's who's been the subject of speculation of a possible suspect. George Burke, Jr. died 2 to 3 years after the murders of the two girls in 1947, age 29. So Stinney's mother had worked for the Burke family for a brief period, and Stinney's sister recalled that her mother had once come home saying that Burke Sr. had made advances to her, and their father had told their mother to no longer go back. And Stinney's sister claimed to have heard that the Burke boys had framed Stinney because their mother didn't want to give it up.
Ew.
Burke Sr. conducted an initial search for the girls and was the owner of the territory behind Green Hill Baptist Church where the girls' bodies were found. And he was also the foreman of the grand jury that indicted Stinney and has been
Just
accused of
corruption all
helping
around.
steer the blame onto Stinney.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's an awful,
Yeah,
awful thing that happened, and that was
it is.
one of many that happened
Right.
to black people.
Mm-hmm.
It's awful. You got a
And
couple
white
more?
people that get away with shit.
Yeah, of course. Ugh, it's just. That's our history. March 24th, 1944 was a Friday, and here's something crazy. RAF flight sergeant, it was World War II, that's the Royal Army flight sergeant, Nicholas Alcamaid, somehow survived a fall of 18,000 feet without a parachute
Oh, God.
when his Lancaster bomber was shot down east of Schellenberg. Pine trees and soft snow broke his fall.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, he was one of 7 crew members returning from a 300-bomber raid on Berlin, and they were attacked by a German night fighter. The attack caused the Lancaster to catch fire and began to spiral out of control as his parachute had caught fire and was unserviceable. He jumped from the aircraft without it, preferring to die on impact rather than burn to death. And he fell 18,000 feet to the ground. His fall was broken by fir trees and soft snow cover on the ground. Can you imagine him falling through all these trees?
Who found him, I wonder?
When he fell down, he was able to move his arms and legs and suffered only a sprained leg.
Oh, my God.
The Lancaster crash bursted into flames, killing the pilot, Jack Newman, and 3 other members of the crew. They're buried in the Hanover War Cemetery. Alcamaid was subsequently captured and interviewed by the Gestapo, who were initially suspicious of his claim to have fallen without a parachute.
Yeah.
This was until the wreckage of the aircraft was examined and his parachute was found, as Alcamaid had described it. The Germans gave Alcamaid a certificate testifying to the fact, and he was a celebrated prisoner of war before being repatriated in May 1945.
Oh.
I wonder if they still tortured him, or they're like, oh, he's a miracle, so let's not torture him.
Yeah, I don't know.
And then we'll end this with a birthday to just cleanse our palates. This is a
All
pretty
right.
good birthday. Singer, songwriter, actress, and music producer, born in Detroit, Michigan. You want to guess who it is?
I don't know.
She's one of the Supremes.
Oh, Diana Ross.
Diana Ross! She was the second of 6 children, born to Ernestine and Fred Ross Sr. Her mother named her Diane, but the birth certificate was mistaken to fill out with the name Diana. Her family and Detroit friends all called her Diane all her life. She grew up with 2 sisters, Barbara and Rita, and 3 brothers, Arthur, Fred Jr., and Wilbert, also known as Chico. She was raised Baptist. She and her family originally resided at 635 Belmont Street in the North End section of Detroit, not far from where I grew up, so we're kind of a lot alike, near Highland Park, Michigan, where her neighbor was Smokey Robinson.
Oh,
They were neighbors.
that's pretty funny.
And you can actually, if you look up 635 Belmont Street in Detroit, you can look at it on Google Maps and see where she grew up.
Oh.
When Diana Ross was 7, her mother contracted tuberculosis, causing her to become seriously ill. So Ross's parents sent their children to live with Ernestine's parents, the Reverend pastor of Bessemer Baptist Church, and Mrs. William Moton in Bessemer, Alabama. After her mother recovered, she and her siblings returned to Detroit. On her 14th birthday in 1958, her family relocated to the working-class Brewster Douglas Housing Project, settling at St. Antoine Street. Ross attended Cass Technical High School, home of the technicians. Notable alumni include Ellen Burstyn, David Allen Greer, Della Reese, Lily Tomlin, and Jack White. They all went there.
Okay.
A 4-year college and prep magnet school in downtown Detroit. Aspiring to become a fashion designer, she took classes in clothing design, pattern making, tailoring, In the evenings on weekends, she also took modeling and cosmetology classes. And Smokey Robinson loaned her the funds required to attend those. And she participated in several of the school's extracurricular activities, including the swim team. In 1960, Hudson's downtown Detroit store hired Diana Ross as its first African-American bus girl. For extra income, she also provided hairdressing services to her neighbor, and she graduated from Cass Tech in January 1962. And then later, she became one of the Supremes.
Cool.
And then later, she came to the theater where I worked.
I know.
And she refused to have be in any places that weren't surrounded in white. So we'd
It's crazy.
hang white sheets everywhere.
Hey, she
Diana Ross has earned it, man. Diana Ross. That's Diana Ross, one of the Supremes. She's now alive in this history timeline we're going through. And we'll bring you April next month. That's just 1 month.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of awful stuff.
I know.
World War II's rough.
Rough territory.
Racism is awful.
Rough territory.
I wish we could just eradicate racism and hate.
Well, it's not getting any better.
Well, and you can't slam dunk a basketball.
That's true.
Thanks for listening, Time Heads.
Time to get out of here, Chuck Berry.
Yeah, it's time to get out of here, Chuck Berry, and stay tuned for our next episode where I'm going to interview another author about an awesome book set in World War II about two brothers, one black and one white, that enlist in the Army, and they're segregated. How about that? Anyway, thanks for listening. We love you.
Bye.
We'd be willing to have sex with all of you. Whoa, whoa, whoa. What'd you do that for on purpose? How'd you do that on purpose?
Don't try her, man, 'cause she dead. She take a laser beam and cut like that. Driving through your life like a Buick. Take you the wrong way home just to watch you squirm. Shooting your inside out with a stutter. She'll introduce you to a restaurant of water. And you'll be crying for your uncle or mother. Before she turns you over to kiss your wounds. And when she shakes her hips, past the west.
Matt Truman Ego Trip is the greatest band of all time. Buy their music. Also, American Timelines is a product of History for Jerks and a member of the Queen City Podcast Network. Find out more about History for Jerks at historyforjerks.com. Check out the Gruff and Loud Show on YouTube and the Nerd School podcast featuring the sexy art star. There's also a dumb t-shirt shop on Threadless, created by History for Jerks. You can buy a Gordon Jump shirt or an Edie McClurg shirt. It's really dumb and stupid.